Cleopatra didn't seduce an empire. She outsmarted it. Buried under centuries of myths and Roman smear campaigns lies the real queen, a cunning strategist, master of politics, and one of the most dangerous women to ever wear a crown. It's time to meet the Cleopatra history tried to erase. Cleopatra beyond the posterized sexy queen. Cleopatra's intelligence was her true crown jewel. She was no passive figurehead. She was a multilingual scholar, fluent in at least 7 languages, including Egyptian, an unusual trait for her Greek-descended Ptolemaic dynasty. Most Ptolemies didn't even bother learning the language of the people they ruled. Cleopatra did. She studied philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and governance. And she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty either. Early in her reign, Egypt faced a devastating famine, and she responded with policies any modern economic minister would admire: distributing grain, stabilizing inflation, adjusting currency values, and controlling prices. She wasn't just smart, she was bold. When Rome came calling, she didn't shrink from the challenge. Instead, she leveraged her relationships with Julius Caesar, and later Mark Antony, not merely for romance, but for statecraft. With Antony, she supplied an enormous fleet and even joined him in campaigns. Her spies kept her informed, and she maneuvered through politics with more finesse than many of her male contemporaries. Cleopatra was less of a seductress and more of a commander-in-chief with a brilliant marketing strategy. What history tried to erase. Much of what we know about Cleopatra comes from Roman sources written long after her death, by men who had every reason to vilify her. Augustus, formerly Octavian, Rome's first emperor and her most dangerous enemy, was especially keen on tarnishing her image. He needed to justify the civil war against Antony, who had aligned himself with Cleopatra. What better way to do so than to paint her as a manipulative temptress who ensnared Rome's noble general in an eastern web of decadence? The result was a character assassination for the ages. Roman poets and politicians depicted Cleopatra as a drunken, pearl-dissolving, gold barge-riding enchantress. Pliny the Elder told tales of her dissolving a pearl in vinegar just to show off. Horace accused her of trying to reduce Rome to a toy of the East. But modern historians know that these were fabrications or exaggerations, tools of propaganda crafted to bolster Augustus's new regime. Cleopatra's real crime wasn't seduction. It was being a powerful, ambitious woman who threatened Roman dominance, religion, alchemy, and identity. Cleopatra wasn't just a secular ruler, she was a religious figurehead too. In Egyptian tradition, rulers were divine. Cleopatra leaned into this by associating herself with Isis, the goddess of motherhood, fertility, and magic. She had herself portrayed as Isis in temples and coinage, aligning herself with both Egyptian and Hellenistic religious traditions. When Antony visited Egypt, she welcomed him not just as a lover, but as Dionysus, the god of wine and fertility. Together, they weren't just political partners, they were living gods to their subjects. Her religious savvy extended into philosophical and esoteric realms. Medieval Arabic sources even credit Cleopatra with writings on alchemy. Though these texts may have been attributed to her posthumously or mythologized over time, they reflect a long-standing association between Cleopatra and esoteric knowledge. Works like On Weights and Measures and the Book of Cleopatra suggest she was revered not just as a queen, but as a wise woman in the alchemical and scientific traditions. On the topic of her heritage, Cleopatra's ethnic identity has been hotly debated in modern times. Her father, Ptolemy X, was Macedonian Greek, a descendant of one of Alexander the Great's generals. Her mother's identity is less clear, though some scholars argue she may have had Egyptian ancestry. There's no conclusive DNA or historical evidence to say definitively. She likely had some Egyptian blood, but she was culturally Greek and ruled as such. The debate reveals more about modern obsessions with race than anything about Cleopatra's time, when political power and lineage mattered more than phenotype. The tomb that still haunts historians. One of the most enduring mysteries of Cleopatra's story is her tomb. According to classical sources, she was buried alongside Mark Antony, as per her final wish. But where? That question has fueled centuries of speculation and treasure hunts. One of the most promising leads is Taposiris Magna, a temple complex near Alexandria. There, archaeologist Kathleen Martinez has unearthed intriguing artifacts, coins bearing Cleopatra's image, statues, and tunnels that suggest a royal tomb might be nearby. Some even speculate that the tomb could be underwater, thanks to centuries of coastal erosion and earthquakes. Despite the buzz, mainstream Egyptologists remain skeptical. They argue that such high-profile burials would have occurred in Alexandria itself, though much of the ancient city now lies beneath the sea. Until definitive evidence is found, Cleopatra's name on a sarcophagus, or even better, her remains, the tomb remains elusive, as mysterious as the queen herself, casting wars and cultural controversies. Cleopatra's story isn't just ancient history, it's an ongoing cultural battleground. A recent example erupted when Netflix released the docudrama Queen Cleopatra, casting biracial British actress Adele James in the titular role. The move sparked outrage in Egypt, where government officials and scholars accused the production of distorting history and blackwashing Cleopatra's image. The show's producers defended their casting as a modern interpretation based on possible Egyptian ancestry, cultural storytelling, and inclusiveness. But the backlash revealed deeper tensions. Earlier portrayals, such as Elizabeth Taylor's in the 1963 epic, cast a white woman without nearly as much controversy. That discrepancy highlights how Cleopatra's image has been weaponized for political and racial narratives in different eras. In truth, the historical Cleopatra likely looked Mediterranean, a mix of Greek and possibly Egyptian ancestry. But the fight over her image today is more about modern identity politics than historical accuracy. Cleopatra's secret weapons. While the Roman historians fixated on her beauty, ancient sources like Plutarch emphasize Cleopatra's charm, intellect, and presence. He wrote that her voice and conversation were more captivating than her appearance, and that her wit made her irresistible. She used these skills not only to impress Caesar and Antony, but to manipulate negotiations, forge alliances, and maintain control over her kingdom. She also used spies liberally. Cleopatra maintained a sophisticated network of informants across the eastern Mediterranean, keeping tabs on Rome, her rivals, and even her lovers. When Antony was in campaign, she was receiving reports from his generals. She didn't just play the part of a queen, she was an active operator in the grand chessboard of Mediterranean politics. Her legendary dinner with Antony, where she allegedly dissolved a pearl in vinegar, was likely a calculated PR stunt to demonstrate her wealth and power. If Twitter existed, she would have owned the platform. Legacy. From sands to smartphones. Cleopatra's legacy has morphed across the centuries. Roman authors shaped her as a villain. Medieval Islamic scholars portrayed her as a wise alchemist. Renaissance artists painted her as a tragic heroine. Hollywood turned her into a lavish, glamorous spectacle. But in recent decades, scholars have worked to reconstruct her image using coins, papyri, and archaeological evidence. These show her as a politically astute, economically active, and culturally fluent ruler. There are even modern efforts to reclaim her story for feminism and post-colonial narratives. As more women step into positions of leadership globally, Cleopatra's story resonates as an example of female agency in a male-dominated world. She ruled alone, loved strategically, and died on her own terms. And while her end was tragic, it was also defiant. Her final act of resistance against Roman conquest. Why Cleopatra matters today. Cleopatra matters not because of her supposed beauty or her relationships with powerful men, but because she was one of the most capable, complex, and controversial leaders of the ancient world. She was a ruler who refused to be a puppet. She mastered the art of presentation and performance. She knew when to wield diplomacy, when to go to war, and when to exit the stage on her own terms. In the 21st century, as debates rage about representation, gender, power, and truth, Cleopatra's story feels more relevant than ever. Her life sits at the intersection of East and West, womanhood and leadership, myth and reality. She challenges us to rethink how we write history and who gets to write it. So the next time someone casually calls Cleopatra just a seductress or Rome's downfall, remember this. The real Cleopatra didn't fall into history. She bent it to her will, reshaped her world, and continues to shape ours today. And there you have it. If you enjoyed diving into the secret side of history, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Got thoughts, theories, or Cleopatra hot takes? Drop them in the comments. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and remember, behind every myth is a much more badass reality.